Hi, welcome to Onkaparinga Libraries online author talk with Marija Poljak today. Hi, Marija.
Hello, thank you for having me.
I also have with me my co-host, Julie. She's at our hub library at the moment. Hi, Julie.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
And my name is Angela. So today if you want to put a copy of Marija's book on hold, you're welcome to do that through the library. We haven't physically got a copy just yet, but we have got some copies on order. We've also got some copies with Dimmicks at Glenelg. They love working with us, and we love working with them too, because they always stock all the books that we ask them to stock, which is excellent for us. So throughout this webinar today, if you've got any questions you'd like to ask, you can do that through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So if you can't see that Q&A, just hover your mouse and it appears. And at the end of what I have to say, Julie will ask any questions of the audience. So pop them in the Q&A and we will answer them from that part. So first I would like to say thank you for joining us, Marija. And would you like to talk about your debut book that's been out since 15th of October, and just give a brief overview of the book?
Yeah, definitely. So the Courtyard Children really started out as a short story that I began, honestly, more than 10 years ago while I was still a uni student. And it sort of grew from there, and I didn't see it becoming a book at all at that point. And I wrote the story more out of a sense of need or a sense of purpose to write this story and to tell a bit of a tale about what it was like growing up in former Yugoslavia, which is where I'm from and which is where my family's from. But the book itself is a work of fiction. It's a first-person narrative told by the main character, whose name is Mileva Marinkovic, and they call her Mara for short. And it really tells her story almost in a recount style, growing up in what's socialist Yugoslavia at the time, her friendships there, her family, which is quite large and quite strong, and just sort of her coming of age and growing into her identity. And then, of course, as many of us know, things begin to change in Yugoslavia. There's a lot of ethnic tension, and the country eventually starts to sort of crumble, fall apart, and it leads to war. And this happens in the second half of the book. And up until then, you really have quite a peaceful insight into Mara's life and her friendships, especially with her best friend Marko, who is one of the other central characters in the novel. And then, of course, once the war starts, that's where things sort of begin to dissolve. So you see what happens to her family, what happens to her friendships. You see Mara really begin to question her identity, which she always saw as Yugoslav, and how that begins to change, because really she's of Serbian-born background, but born in Croatia, basically. What's the state of Croatia today? And that really complicates things for her once the war starts. And basically it follows her life from childhood then through to adulthood and the collapse of the nation. And I think what a lot of people really experienced over there in Yugoslavia, which is that massive change, that massive upheaval, and just sort of wondering, who am I and who are we as a people, and how did we lose everything that we had? So like I said, what started as a short story that I was writing almost for my own self turned into this novel now. That's not just about the country, but it's also about coming of age. And I think I guess I was at that age myself when I really started writing it, where I was thinking a lot about, who I am, what my identity is, and what it means really to become an adult and to see where you fit in with society and how. So I won't give away any spoilers as to what happened to Marta and what happened to everyone there. Hopefully there is a bit of an optimistic ending, but the book itself almost has two sides to it, that really youthful, innocent beginning of the story, which is embedded in her childhood, and then that second half, which quite clearly I think takes a turn to mirror what's happening in Yugoslavia at the time and all the changes and how everyone's lives just sort of were turned upside down basically by all that occurred. So yeah, it's quite similar, I think, to really what happened to much of my family and a lot to do with my background. And that's why I just felt really compelled to write this story and to share it with people, as a migrant and as a person of refugee background, to really try and capture the essence of this is what Yugoslavia was and this is how we know it today. And a lot of people, I think, were just as surprised as anyone over there to see how it all played out, basically.
Did you, do you have, what age were you when you came to Australia?
I was really young. I was only 4 years old when we came here. So I've grown up in Australia. I'm very much Australian, but I grew up raised, by parents who are the product of Yugoslav society. And all of that culture, all of that history was a huge part of my upbringing for both my brother and I growing up here. The stories, the food, the music, our connection to our family, the hometown of the character Mara is actually my hometown, Zadar, which is in Croatia. So all of that was always a very big part of my life. I never felt disconnected from it in any way. And I started traveling and going back there more often as a teenager and then as an adult. So I've always sort of had that other life over there of going back to what's now Croatia and back to Serbia and seeing my family there. So it's always featured really significantly even in my life here. But my story would be a totally different one to the character's story in the book. I've grown up in quite a different society and quite a different time to that of my parents. But they really passed on a lot of that to me, basically.
Do you have any memories from when you were 4 or even when you've gone back that have played a part in the book?
Definitely do. I have very few memories of when I was young, of actually having lived there. So my family, we left what was Croatia and went to Serbia before we came here to Australia. And so I remember Serbia a bit more, probably just because I was that little bit older. And probably because I noticed the change as well. So my memories of my actual childhood there are quite, a little bit dark in a way. I remember feeling a bit anxious, a bit odd. All my memories are also winter over there. I think I noticed going from beautiful Dalmatia up to northern Serbia that winter was like nothing I'd ever seen before. So I remember the snow and the cold and those sorts of things. But then my much clearer memories came after going there as a teenager. So we returned to Zadar in Croatia for the first time when I was 13. And then we went back to Serbia as well when I was 16. And then I was sort of going every couple of years up until recently, actually. So I definitely have memories of my hometown, of Novi Sad in Serbia, which is where we also lived, which is like my adopted hometown. And we traveled quite a lot, quite extensively through all of Croatia and all of Serbia every time that we would visit there as a family. So I have lots of memories almost sort of that were drip fed to me through all my visits throughout the years of seeing what it was like 10 years ago to 5 years ago. And they're really quite vivid, and sometimes we'd stay there for quite extended amounts of time. So definitely that would have influenced my writing, especially when discussing the setting and what things look like and feel like, and all those visuals, I suppose, that I describe in the book. They're quite strongly imprinted in my mind from having been there myself, really, and seen it all, and throughout all those years, really.
So did you have to do much research for your book? Because you obviously have lots of memories. Did you do a lot of research as well?
I did, in the sense that I just had to go back and fact check and make sure that the sequence of events was accurate. So I was lucky because it is a first person story. I was able to build the events around that central character and really tell it from her point of view. So I didn't need to get too caught up in trying to capture the whole big picture, really. But especially when it came down to the conflict and the war starting in Yugoslavia, I wanted to make sure I had the events accurate there. I don't go into too much explicit detail about what happened. It's not really a retelling in a political sense. It's the character's story. But in the way it unraveled and certain key events that occurred before, during, and after, I had to make sure that they were accurate, and I wasn't just basing it all on my vague memories or what I already thought I knew. And And I reference events even before the war, I suppose, that were of significance. So whether it's the Olympics, the Winter Olympics that happened in Sarajevo in the 80s, or things like basketball championships and all those little events that occurred for the characters there that were huge for us as people in Yugoslavia, I went back and just made sure that they were all accurate and those dates were true. And then I'd always get sort of caught down that little rabbit hole of researching everything and anything, as you do on the internet, and the stories and the perspectives, because there are many perspectives about what Yugoslavia was like and what actually happened during the war and how it happened. I think it's important to know this is just one story. It's a fictional story, but it's just one perspective of so many different groups and peoples that were in that whole country. This is the one that's most familiar to me, and that's really why I told it. So the research is a combination of my own memories, my parents' stories played a huge part in it, and anything else I sort of read and looked into on the way.
So on another topic, in your day job, that you're a teacher. So did you? Well, firstly, I'm amazed that you can write a book and work in a teaching role, do it all at the same time, because that must have been a bit tough as well. But did you always think you would write a book? Did you always aspire to write, or is teaching your first love? Like what? How did that all play out?
I think they always sort of went hand in hand. I always loved writing and reading. I was a massive bookworm. I went and studied writing at university straight out of high school, and I never, ever, ever imagined that I'd want to be a teacher, especially when I was in high school. I certainly didn't think I'd want to be a high school teacher. But almost by accident, while I was studying, I volunteered with the Refugee Association and did some homework help. So I would help high school students of refugee background with their homework, and I just absolutely love that experience. And I had another job as a bicultural support worker where I'd help little kids who came from my background actually in childcare and in kindy and needed help with language and getting used to the new environment here in Australia. I'd go in and I'd work with them. And somehow just through working with kids and young people, I realized that it's actually something I loved so much. So after I completed my writing degree, I went and did a Master's of Teaching to be a teacher, but I wanted to be a high school teacher. I wanted to work with older students and to do English specifically because of that love for reading and writing, and because I also studied sociology at uni, and that was a real eye-opener for me. I always loved those subjects, so that's sort of how I got into what I teach now, especially, which is Aboriginal studies and working in Aboriginal education and teaching women's studies as well. And I feel really, really lucky that I was just in the right place at the right time to end up at the school where I work now, where I get to teach these subjects that are so rare and unfortunately so rare that I think are just fantastic. So on top of English, I get to really work on these subjects that I think students are hugely passionate about and that are hugely important and eye-opening and amazing. And it's really gone hand in hand with my writing in the sense that it's opened my eyes a lot as a person. So although teaching, as you said, is incredibly busy and demanding, and you do get that very little time for yourself, it's been the best thing for me as well. Not to make it all about me, but becoming a teacher was just something that had all these added benefits that I never could have seen or imagined going into the career, of just learning so much about my students and their lives and their experiences. It's just given me so much more to draw upon, I suppose. And as a writer, you're always sort of doing that, thinking of people and their stories and where they come from and what their lives are like. So teaching's definitely, I think, a job that helps that. And because this is a young adult novel, I'm always sort of with my audience. I work with young adults, I work with high schoolers. I think they're one of the most underrated groups of people in the world. They get such a harsh rap sometimes, unfairly, but they're fantastic. They're this wonderful cohort caught in between childhood and adulthood, where you can have these fantastic conversations with them, but they're still just so full of hope and humor and generosity and they're a fantastic group to work with. So teaching sort of keeps me going. I don't think it's something I'd ever want to give up or can give up. And I'm just going to have to find that magical balance of teaching and writing somehow. So far, so good. I've managed to do it. But yeah, hopefully there'll be more of the writing as well with the teaching, definitely.
Yeah, that's great. And anyway, it's all about you today, so you can talk as much as you want about yourself. And I do totally get what you're saying about high school students. I've got my own, and I recognise it's been tricky this year for everyone. So I think they've come out and done a really good job.
They're a good bunch of people, really.
People coming. How long did it take you to write your book?
Oh, look, I work in strange and mysterious ways. I wrote the bulk of this book years ago now. I tend to work in chunks of writing, and then I could leave it for months, but I'm very good at just sitting down and getting it done. So the bulk of it I wrote and finished probably a few years ago now. And I didn't really come back to the book until after having children myself. So I've got two kids, a 4-year-old and a 2.5-year-old. And just to add to, the complexity of life, I've got them as well. But funnily enough, having kids was the thing that really propelled me to do something with this book as well. I think before, I guess I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't really think too seriously about it, but something funny happens when you have kids. You feel like you become a little bit invincible and that you can do anything after doing that. So I thought, I'm going to have a go at this book, and I did. And fortunately, I was successful in finding a publisher who was really happy to work with me. So I've spent about the past year before the book came out in the actual editing process. So going back and, fixing things up and making it what it is today. So that actual part has taken about a year of the back and forth and getting the book on its feet. But I really worked on it in stages. And I think I can see that now when I read it. It's evident to me that it's something I wrote when I was younger. When you look back on something you wrote from years ago, and I'm sure now I would go back and change so much, but I kind of tried to leave it intact because it does still capture the voice of that protagonist, being, young and at that age that I was when I actually wrote it. It kind of made sense to have that voice there. So I spent, the bulk of my 20s, really, I suppose, working away at it, editing it now. And I'm sure that what I'd write in the future, if I write something, it'd look a bit different to what that is, actually. Yeah.
Did you you did your writing degree? Was that obviously after you've written the book?
No, that was before. That was straight after high school. I went into a writing degree at UniSA, just because that's what I loved doing. I did writing and sociology, and we had a few projects there, and that's sort of where the idea for this book came about. I wrote a short story that was published in the university's anthology, so where they select work of students. And I think just out of my own interest, I kind of kept building on that story, and that's how it grew. So that was kind of my project in my own time. Even after I finished uni, once I'd become a teacher, I sort of had this book there at the back of my mind as something I knew I just wanted to finish it, to have the story complete, and then what would come after would happen eventually, and it did. So yeah, that's sort of how it grew from that, really. And I think just having those little bits of support from whether it was professors or tutors on the way who recognized that, yes, you can write, or yes, you've got something to say. Sometimes that was all it took to help me just keep going and think, I do want to write this book, because for a long time I had that fear that I just wasn't sure that anyone would want to read it. And especially when you're someone, I think in Australia, comes from another background, you tend to feel like maybe your story is not a common story, or maybe people aren't as interested in the stories of migrants as they might be in other stories. I know that that's not necessarily true. I know that now, but it does always feel like more of a battle, or that you have to convince people, or you always have that fear because this is such a personal sort of retelling as well. And it had to be that way. Yeah.
Do you think your degree made you write better? Like, did it help you do your book in the way it's done, or?
I hope so. I'm sure the uni would want to hear that. Yes, absolutely did. I think it's experience of a lot of things. It's my degree definitely helped, but I think it was also just age, and even, like I said, becoming a teacher and experiencing a few other things in life. And again, even having kids kind of made me slow down and be more patient and more reflective, and I could apply that to my writing in a way that I probably didn't do when I was younger. And it also made me more open to sharing my writing. I think that's a really important thing. I never did that when I was younger. There was no way I would have shared anything with anyone. I was really private in that way. Whereas I suppose the older you get, you sort of lose your inhibitions a bit more, and you're willing to share. And I suppose that's a bit of advice I could give. If I could give to anyone, I'd give them that: is don't be scared of sharing your writing, especially if you think it's good and others have told you that it's good and that you've got a story to tell. That's something I would have, and hopefully, I could have done earlier, I suppose, when I was younger. And that was the part where university and studying the craft really did help. You're sort of forced to put your stuff out there and to have it exposed. But that's that real vulnerability of any type of creative art, whether it's writing or performing or music. You're sharing parts of you with a huge, wide and varied audience, and that in itself is terrifying. But you know that you've got an audience, and they will find your work, and there'll always be a group of people for whom it resonates and that they connect with it. And even if it's only a small group, it's still worth it. That story's still connecting with someone.
Definitely. So your publisher is Reza Edge.
That's right, yeah.
Do you want to talk a bit about your journey with them?
So one thing that really helped me is that in finding my publisher and going through that process was connecting with Writers SA. So they're the organisation statewide who support writers, and I was always sort of a member with them. And I went to one of their workshops maybe a couple of years ago now, where somebody spoke about seeking out publishers and going on that publishing journey. And something that stood out for me then was they said, you need to find a publisher that matches to the type of writing you're doing, because a lot of people maybe step blindly into the publishing industry, which is a huge, big, frightening, and let's face it, commercial industry that make money and make sales. It can be quite daunting. So you really need to find your niche and find where you fit. So I really took that advice on board and went on the Writers SA website, and they have quite an extensive list of all sorts of opportunities, but publishers as well, and opportunities for publishing, not just novels, but poetry and prose and magazine, and there's so many different types of writing that you can do and that can get published. And that's where I found my publisher, and their description sort of seemed to match exactly the type of writing I do. So it's young adult and it's issues based. And they specifically said they love writing from authors of different backgrounds and different stories, and that real sort of multicultural lens. And I thought, that sounds perfect. That's exactly up my alley. I'm going to give it a shot with these guys, because I think it pays to be smart about how you do that, to go into it carefully, to do your homework in a sense, and think about all the independent publishers there are, like my publishers around Australia. You're more likely to have a chance having your manuscript even get a look in, which is the first step, and avoiding all those really difficult processes and waiting times, or looking for agents and things like that. I'm someone who's really not connected in that world at all. So for me, I wanted to sort of keep it small and see how I go. And I was lucky because this was the first publisher I genuinely properly approached, and I heard back from them within a few months in it, and they'd like to take a look at it further. So that was a fantastic response. I was absolutely floored, and we sort of took it from there back and forth. And they are interstate, so it's all been email and phone calls and those sorts of things, but they were fantastic because they really loved the story and believed in the story itself and wanted to work with it. And they've been fantastic this year again, in this crazy weird year, and in getting the book up and running in what's a difficult time for promotion, especially for new authors, when you really can't get yourself out there. There's no travel, there's no events, there's no writers' events and things happening. But they've been super supportive there, and they managed to help get the audiobook and everything as well. So it's been a good journey and a close journey. I'm lucky to get to work with not just the publishers as a company, but the owner of the company as well, because they are small and independent. So it's a lot more personal in that sense. And it's a really nice way to, I think, ease yourself into the industry, to feel supported and not overwhelmed.
Yeah, that's excellent.
That whole process.
Okay, well, that's all the questions I have. Thank you. I'm going to pass you over to Julie now and see if there's any questions from the audience.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Angela. And thanks for what you shared with us, Marija. That's fascinating. You mentioned that this book has been written in chunks and over a lengthy period of time, and you talked about inhibitions and losing them as you get older and more confidence in yourself. Did you let anyone read this book along the way, either family and friends, or did you wait until that draft was completed and went to the publisher?
I did let a few people read it even before I went to the publisher, in its first draft stages, which weren't drastically different from what it is now. But one of the first people I gave it to was a friend of mine, Yelena, and I mentioned her in the acknowledgements in the book. And I shared it with her because she's one of my best friends, but also because she's of my background, and I sort of felt like I needed a sounding board there around all the people and their mannerisms and the things they do, to see whether this was just my own reality or if it's something that we could all kind of relate to as people from that background. And I also shared it with my brother quite closely, because he's almost just a mirror version of myself. He's a teacher as well. He's an avid reader. We've grown up together side by side here and basically had the same lives. So I knew I had to share it with him, because he would see the personal connections there as well. He would immediately be able to recognize the stories that he would have also perhaps heard growing up, that maybe came from our parents or extended family. And his memories, again, would be different to mine, even if they are similar or the same at times. So I did get him look at it. And he's also an English teacher, so he had that nice critical lens there. But he and I are very close, and he's very honest with me, and was really good in that sense. And then eventually I also gave it to my parents, and that was, I think, the scariest part for me, because this book draws so much from them and their lives and their experiences. So I did give them a copy, but they have read this final version, both of them as well. And I was sort of just hoping to get the thumbs up from them more than anyone else. And they did like it, and they did both read it. And I'm sure they would have recognized and seen all sorts of things. And I think they were surprised more than anything about how much I remember. They had a moment there where they thought, you really have been listening to everything we've said all our lives. I said, yes, I have been. Because so many of the characters also are reflective of them and their lives. Even the grandfather in the book, Marta's grandfather, is almost an exact replica of my mother's grandfather, even down to the name. So some people are quite close like that, whereas other characters are totally made up. So I put them in, and they're not necessarily resembling anyone or anything. It's a bit of a mix like that. So I still kept it quite close in terms of who I shared it with, until now. Of course, now it's there for everyone, but I have had my immediate family and friends read it, and it did take as well their responses to encourage me to really do something with it, because they read that first draft and they liked it, and they were quite honest in their response. So I thought it's worth trying to do something with it. Yeah.
That's great. You obviously have a fantastic supportive network, and it sounds like They can give you influence and input on all sorts of aspects, which helps make you fantastic. And I'm sure your parents are immensely proud of you.
Thank you.
Especially acknowledging your history and having that so important to you and bringing that into your story. No parent can ask any more than that, I don't think.
Oh, they're hugely supportive. Yeah, I'm really thankful, because even in the writing process, I don't know how I would have done that without the family I have and the partner that I have. Like I said, we've got 2 very little kids, so I know he's had to pick up the slack a lot there and really step in so I could get this book done. So it was a team effort in a lot of ways. But my partner's of the same background as me. My husband, he's from Serbia. So I think this story for all of us has a bit more meaning to it than just had I written any other kind of book. Everyone in a way feels that connection with it, the whole family. So I think we're all kind of happy and surprised and happy to see it get to where it is. Yeah.
Fantastic. So what do you actually find the most rewarding and the most challenging parts of writing?
The most challenging part for me was the editing, not in the sense that it's challenging, but I'm very much I like to complete things and be done with it kind of person. So the editing process is frustrating, even though it's also rewarding because it's well worth it. You need to edit. It's probably the longer part of the process actually than the writing itself. It's also, well, for now, for me, the challenging part is just finding the time, to be honest. But it's quite a solitary thing, writing. You're very much in your own head, doing it on your own. And sometimes you can get quite wrapped up in that world that you sort of need to just step out of it and remember where you are in the real world, especially when writing first person. I really got into this character and became a part of her world in a way that you do when it's a first person point of view. And I'd love to step away from that next time if I were to write something else, to look at doing some kind of third person story, just to have that different perspective and not be so involved in the character's mind. But in terms of what's rewarding, well, then that's clearly the feedback from readers and just being able to share it again. No doubt that's the most rewarding part, is seeing what everyone else has to say about it and the different things people get out of the same story. It's just so exciting to actually have those conversations. And I know I've spoken to some really good colleagues at work, friends of mine who've read the book, and they all have a different take on it. They all love different characters or different parts of the book. And it's all so subjective. You realize it's all entirely subjective and everyone's going to have their own interpretation of things. So that's the best part, seeing which parts of the book actually connect with people in different ways. And it's always based on everyone else's own experiences from their own lives, really, what they actually connect to. So the writing can be a bit of a slog, but you do have your moments where you get into it, you know exactly what you want to say, you can see where it's headed, and that's very satisfying. You're close to completing it, or you know exactly what you want to say, but the reward is really in the final product and in sharing it. Definitely.
Absolutely. And we are all such diverse readers, which makes the world go round, and why there's so many variety of books out there, which is just fantastic. My next question, what books do you like reading in your leisure time?
Oh, all sorts. I've always got a few going at any one time. At the moment, I'm reading The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, because I've read her, her second book actually earlier. So Kirke, or Circe as they call it, and absolutely loved it. I love her so much and her writing. So I'm into a lot of that historical fiction, and like Geraldine Brooks, I grew up reading her. I'm reading another one of hers at the moment as well. So books like The Kite Runner and The Book Thief and all those huge ones I enjoyed growing up. But I'll read anything. I'm also reading Candy at the moment, which is a fun book about addiction and all sorts of things. I'll have any going at any one time, so I'm happy to read just about anything, but generally fiction. However, I do love non-fiction as well. I read was it earlier this year or last year, I think, earlier this year, Sand Talk by Tyson Yunkaporta. Absolutely loved that one. That book just blew my mind. I just devoured it. So usually I have a few going, a combination of fiction and non-fiction, and even some young adult, of course, that I also have in the mix. It's almost like I have a short attention span, and I'll start reading one and then start another at the same time, and it's more interesting that way, having a few at a time. But yeah, generally historical fiction I'm a fan of, and also a lot of the new non-fiction sort of coming out lately. I read a lot in terms of my work as a women's studies teacher. So reading books by women like Roxane Gay and Clementine Ford and authors like that. I've read all those as well. Yeah.
Wow, very, very varied, which is lovely to hear. Very. I do like to try different things too. Although I am a one book at a time person personally, I have delved into different formats though, and ebooks and actually audiobooks are one of my favourites now. And I've just started listening to your audiobook, which is narrated by yourself. Can you tell us why you chose to narrate it yourself?
That was a request from my publisher. I definitely didn't put my hand up like, yeah, I want to read my book out loud and listen to my voice recorded. No, definitely not. We were really lucky because we won a grant this year to be able to do some audiobook versions. So my publisher's got that, and she asked whether I wanted to do my one for two reasons: because they're backing audiobooks that are actually narrated by the authors themselves, and also probably because of the pronunciation in my book. It's not a job that could be left just up to anyone, it seems. There's a lot of new words in there, because I do throw in some Serbo-Croatian words, not just the names of people and places, but references to different things, and whether it's song lyrics or items or food, things like that. I sort of just mix it in with the English from time to time. So in terms of actually reading that out loud and recording it, I was kind of the only person for the job. So I went and did that. I've never actually listened to audiobooks myself. I love just reading them. So I have no idea what it even sounds like in comparison to more professional works. But it was an interesting experience. The kind of thing where I don't know if I ever want to read my book again. I've read it that many times and recorded it so thoroughly. But it was interesting. It was actually, again, a satisfying experience, and getting that emotion in there and wanting to do it justice as well was important to me. And hearing now about how many people like yourself, Julie, actually do listen to audiobooks. I really didn't think there were that many, but it turns out there are, because I've had a few ask. I'm kind of glad I did it, because, yeah, like I said, I don't dabble in that myself as yet. So at least it's there in another format, and I think accessibility is important as well. So the more formats it's available in, then the better, the more people who can actually access it in a way that they need to.
Yes, and I think one thing that I find, people who are time poor, you can easily listen to an audiobook if you're doing the house cleaning, out gardening, going walking, wherever. I personally like audiobooks that are narrated by the author, because you get more of a feel of who they are, and they obviously know their book back to front, and so it flows very nicely as well. So yeah, I love it.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Good. Hope you like it.
So do you have a new writing project? And if so, can you tell us what audience it would be aimed at and which genre?
I have an idea, let's call it that, rather than a writing project at this stage. The one thing that I am certain of, like I said, is it's going to be third person. I'm stepping away and experimenting with a different form in that sense. I do still want to do young adult, but in saying that, even this book that I've written, when I say it's young adult, it's also for adults. It's really not for anyone younger than 15 or 16, because of the content and because of the, I suppose, background knowledge that's required. So I wouldn't mind experimenting in something that's also, again, towards a more adult audience, which is where I tend to gravitate. And whatever idea I have next, it's once again, its focus is very much on relationships and on people. because even though the Courtyard Children is centered around life in Yugoslavia and the collapse of Yugoslavia, it's a story about a person and her relationships, and about love and about family, and about identity. And that tends to be something that I always come back to, and the themes that I tend to focus on, and exploring those relationships. So this book really looked mostly at not just Marta and her family, but her best friend Marko, who is of a different ethnic background to her, and how their seemingly inseparable bond starts to crumble and break and drift apart because of external events. So I really like looking at those dynamics, especially between people who are incredibly close. So I know in my next project, I'll look at something similar, but I want to try and step away from writing about that time and place in Yugoslavia. That was something I had to do first up for myself more than anything. But now I do want to bring things back to another setting, to another time, to different types of people and different types of events. But it'll always be probably a realistic sort of fiction rooted in reality, rooted in real life experiences and issues-based style of writing. And I'd love to work still with young adult and adult. That's probably my focus audience, both of those.
Fantastic. Well, I'll look forward to that one. I do think it is a good audience and a tough audience to get reading sometimes. So yeah, it's great to have good stories for that.
Yeah.
So my final question is, what do you hope your readers will take away from the Courtyard Children?
What I want readers to take away from this, I mean, everyone will take away something different, but for me, this was a story ultimately about the right to self-representation and to creating one's own identity in a way where you're the owner of that. And I wanted to show that this is what my idea of Yugoslav people and of Yugoslavia is like, because I suppose growing up as a Yugoslav in Australia, you often get told who you are or where you're from, or you think people have preconceived ideas of who you are. And it's important that we have diverse representations of marginalized groups. So just because you might belong to a minority, it doesn't mean that even within that minority, everyone's the same. There's a lot of diversity within that group. So I wanted to show that Yugoslavia was a place full of, music and sports and culture and good times and bad times and interesting characters and traditional characters and educated people. And it's not just a place where a war happened and things fell apart and there's no hope there for the future. It's a really vibrant place, and it still is today, even if it looks very different to what it was. And this was my attempt at sort of showing that to people, because we do have a big community here in Australia. And a lot of people arrived in that rush during the 1990s, like when my family arrived. And I suppose there's more to us than just that war. There was a time before, there's a time after, and although it was a huge change, we're all individuals with different identities and different interests. And for those of us living here, we're all also Australian more than anything. So I wanted to kind of tell that story just to give that insight into a different life, into a time and a place that seems like it will never be repeated again. That one magical time in Yugoslavia's history that was really quite brief in reality. So I wanted people to see what that's like, and to maybe give a bit of a glimpse into my identity as well, because I've always identified as a Yugoslav. And I know people will ask me straight away, and they always have here after that, well, is that Serbian? Is that Croatian? And my answer is sort of, in this book, it's Yugoslav, it's everything. You can be more than that. And a lot of us are more than that, really. So this was like my little letter to the country and to what it was and to what it's become and to the people from there. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, you're very passionate and very inspiring, and I'm very much looking forward to finishing the audiobook, and I do encourage everyone in the audience to go out and grab a copy of it. But I'd like to thank the audience for joining us today. thank you to Angela for hosting us, and obviously a big thank you, Marija, for speaking to us. I've learned a lot about you as a person and your journey and your book, and yeah, fascinating person. And I've no doubt you'll do well in the future with other books coming up.
Hopefully, yes. Yep.
Yes. I'd just like to mention, please, to our audience, follow us on Facebook, and be sure to check out our Onkaparinga Libraries Eventbrite page for more upcoming author talks. And just also to mention that we will be emailing a feedback survey. So if you have a few minutes of your time to respond to that, that would be greatly appreciated, to find out more of what you would like to hear coming up in the future. So I'll hand back to you, Angela.
Excellent, thank you. It was such a pleasure to talk to you today, Marija. I've really enjoyed everything you had to say. You are an amazing person. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the questions. They're all great questions. And yeah, I'd love to hear back from readers in any way. If they have any more questions, get in touch.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And so we'll say goodbye. Bye.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.